The kingdom of the Suebi, established in the early 5th century, was one of the first Germanic kingdoms to form in the Western Roman Empire's territory, specifically around what is now modern-day Portugal and parts of Spain. Founded by the Suebic people under King Germanic, after a tumultuous period of the Great Migration, the kingdom is notable for its role in the early medieval transformations of the Iberian Peninsula. And if you want to learn about them, you're certainly in the right place. Welcome to the channel. If you're coming back for more, it's good to see you again. And if you're completely new, it's good to meet you. As always, if you want to support the channel, links to Patreon are in the description, and a like on the video certainly helps YouTube push it out to a broader audience, so thank you in advance. Now, with all the good stuff out of the way, get yourself relaxed. It's going to be a long video, and let's begin. Let's go back to the very beginning. Try and trace where the Suebi came from. Well, the Suebi who crossed the Rhine into Roman territory in December of 406 remain somewhat of a mystery, and it's mainly due to the scarcity of the detailed contemporary accounts. It is speculated that these Suebi might be synonymous with the Quadi, a tribe that was historically located north of the Danube, around present-day Slovakia and Austria. Their involvement in the 2nd century Germanic wars, alongside the Marcomanni against Rome, underscores a little more of their historical significance. The connection between the Suebi and Quadi largely stems from the account of St. Jerome of the 406 invasion, which omits the Suebi, but does mention the Quadi, suggesting a potential identification of the two groups. This interpretation, however, does face some challenges from other sources of the time, specifically Orosius, who explicitly lists the Suebi among the Rhine crossers alongside the Quadi and other tribes. Now, the Suebi's identification, of course, varies among different historical texts, with some 6th century writers linking them to the Alemanni, or more broadly, with the Germans. The Laterculus Voronensius of the 4th century places the Suebi alongside several Germanic tribes, including the Alemanni and Quadi, so there's more weight to that. The absence of the Suebi in certain historical accounts has led to some to theorize a recent ethnogenesis, proposing that the Suebi were more of a conglomerate of various smaller groups, including parts of the Quadi and Marcomanni that merged together during their migration to the Iberian Peninsula. Probably because of safety in numbers, we don't know. Now, what about the motives? Why did the Suebi cross the Rhine? Well, it's not definitively explained, but if you know anything about that time period, you're probably going to attribute it to the Hunnic expansion westward, which purportedly displaced a lot of Germanic tribes, pushing them into Roman territories. The hypothesis is popular for a reason, but there are a few people who cite lack of concrete evidence, but it seems at the moment to be the most likely reason why they crossed the Rhine. Of course, running away from the Huns was certainly the fashion of the time. Now, in response to this barbarian incursion, the usurper Constantine III initially contained these tribes in northern Gaul. However, The political turmoil in Hispania, that's Spain, or thereabouts, spurred by the revolt led by Gerontius and the proclamation of Maximus as emperor, eventually drew Constantine III to the region. Gerontius's maneuvering in Gaul incited the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi to move towards Hispania in 409, marking the beginning of their significant presence in the Iberian Peninsula. And before you say it, I'm not getting off topic by talking about the Romans, because the only way we can talk about these tribes' history, if it's not strictly from an archaeological standpoint, is viewing it through a Roman lens. So, that is just what we're going to do, isn't it? The civil conflict between Constantine and Gerontius in the Iberian Peninsula led to a significant military oversight, namely the neglect of the defenses on the Pyrenees. This lapse of judgment left southern Gaul and the Iberian Peninsula exposed to barbarian incursions. According to Hidatius, the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi people capitalized on this opportunity, crossing into Hispania around the late September or mid-October of 409. The logistical challenge of moving vast numbers through the Pyrenees suggests that this migration probably unfolded over several weeks. Upon their arrival, these groups, along with local Roman forces, plunged the region into chaos through widespread looting throughout 409 and 410. And this resulted not just in the loss of what people had, but also devastating famines later on. Hidatius's accounts of the dire conditions are harrowing, detailing instances of cannibalism among the desperate populace. Well, by 411, some 1 year later, a semblance of peace was negotiated among the barbarian groups, leading to the division of Hispania into territories that were controlled by each of them. This division is often interpreted through the lens of Roman practices of granting lands or sorties to federate groups, hinting at a formal agreement with the usurper Maximus, though direct evidence of such treaties is lacking. Once again, it just seems to be the most likely thing that would have happened. Hidatius attributes the peace to divine intervention, while Orosius hints at the barbarian leader's desire for a formal pact akin to that latter achieved by the Visigoths. This territorial acquisition saw the Silling Vandals taking control of Hispania Baetica, the Alans receiving Lusitania and Carthaginensis, and the Hasding Vandals and the Suevi sharing the northwestern part of the province of Galatia. The allocation of territories following the invasion of 409 led the Suebi to establish their presence in the western part of Galatia, adjacent to the Atlantic Ocean, spanning from modern-day Porto in Portugal to Pontevedra in Galicia province of Spain. This strategic settlement positioned the Suebi well for expansion, with Braga soon becoming their capital. Their domain later broadened with Astorga, Lugo, and Minho River Valley, marking a significant Suebic footprint in the region, without initial evidence of their presence in other cities within Galicia before 438. Contrary to some narratives that depict the arrival of the Suebi as disastrous, historical records from the period between 411 and 430, particularly from Hidatius, do not mention conflicts with the local Galaci population. Instead, Accounts from Orosius suggest a peaceful integration, with the Suebi transitioning from warriors to farmers upon settling in their new lands. Now, the Suebi themselves, speaking a Germanic language, are associated with the Elbe Germanic dialects, part of the early linguistic expressions of the Irminones. This group is believed to have migrated from the east, originally from around the Baltic region, and by late classical times was located south of the Elbe and extended across the Danube into the Roman Empire. The High German consonant shift, a significant linguistic development defining modern High German, and particularly Upper German, occurred among these dialects. Toponymical evidence indicates that another Germanic group, namely the Buri, accompanied the Suebi into Portugal, settling between the Cavado and Homem rivers in a region historically known as Terras de Buoro, the lands of the Buri, referred to as Burio until the High Middle Ages. In 416, the Visigoths, acting under orders from the Western Roman Emperor, entered the Iberian Peninsula to counter a barbarian group that had invaded in 409. Led by King Walia, the Visigoths waged a destructive campaign against the Silling Vandals and Alans, and managed to significantly weaken these groups by 418. However, the Hasding Vandals and the Suevi remained relatively unaffected by the Visigothic campaign, emerging as dominant forces in the region. By 419, following the Visigoths' relocation to Aquitania, tensions escalated between the Vandals, led by Gunderic, and the Suevi king, Germanic. The confrontation culminated in the Battle of Nerbessius Mountains. The conflict was, however, halted by Roman intervention, with forces commanded by the comes Hispaniarum Asterius, targeting the Vandals and driving them towards Baetica, modern-day Andalusia, effectively leaving the Suebi in complete control of Galicia. And the year 429 marked another pivotal moment, when another tribe, the Vandals, gearing up for their expedition to Africa, encountered a Suebi warlord, Hermigarius, who was stationed in Lusitania. The ensuing clash with the new Vandal king, Gaiseric, led to Hermigarius's death by drowning in the Guadiana River while he was trying to retreat. This event marked the first recorded Suevic military action beyond Galicia's provincial borders. Well, with the Vandals' migration to Africa, the Suevi became the sole barbarian power in Hispania. King Hermeric spent the subsequent years strengthening Suebic dominance over Galicia. In the year 430, he abandoned the long-standing peace with local Gallici, leading to a sack of central Galicia. Despite all the aggression, the Gallici, returning to their ancient hill forts and displaying minimal Roman influence, managed to negotiate a new peace agreement, which included a prisoner exchange. Further hostilities erupted, however, in 431 to 433, leading to the dispatch of a local bishop, Symphosius, as an envoy by King Hermeric, signifying the first known instance of Suebi collaborating with the indigenous population. A lasting peace, endured for 2 decades, was finally established in 438, and it marked a period of relative stability and Suebic integration into the local fabric of the Galicia. Which leads us to 438. Amidst declining health, and after securing the entire former Roman province of Galicia, and making peace with the inhabitants, King Hemeric of the Suebis abdicated in favor of his son, Recula. The transition of power marked a shift towards aggression and expansion beyond Galicia. Recula embarked on military campaigns across the Iberian Peninsula, and he rather wisely exploited the weakening grip of the Roman Empire on the region. Of course, the Roman Empire were being constantly sacked at this point. They had been since the year 410. Rome was in quite a state. Now, Recula's reign began with a significant victory in the year 438, where he defeated the Romani Militiae Dux and Devotus, besides the Genil River in Baetica, and he also seized a considerable treasure. The victory marked the beginning of the Suebic expansion into the southern parts of the Iberian Peninsula. By 439, Recula's forces had invaded Lusitania, capturing its capital, the city of Meredia, which temporarily served as the Suebic kingdom's capital. This rapid expansion continued over the following years, with Recula successfully besieging Mertola and even capturing Seville by 441, significantly before the death of his father, Hemeric. The capture of Seville, a key city in Baetica, eventually brought Baetica and Carthaginensis under Suebic control, although some sources at the time, backed up by a bit of modern archaeology, suggest that the Suebis' hold over these territories was more characterized by raids than by significant settlements or governance. Could be. Well, of course, the Romans had to respond somehow, and their response came in 446 with the dispatch of the Magister Utriusque Militae Vetus, accompanied, of course, by a formidable contingent of warriors, who were mainly Goths, actually, and they aimed to quell the Suebic threat and, of course, reinstate imperial authority in the lost territories of Hispania. However, Recula was not having it. He met and defeated the Gothic auxiliaries, forcing Vetus to flee in quite a bit of embarrassment and disgrace. Well, the victory marked the end of Roman imperial attempts to reclaim control over Hispania from the Suebi, and it was certainly the style at the time. The 5th century for Rome was, well, it was a run of bad luck. If the 1800s were the century of humiliation for China, well, then the 5th century was certainly the century of humiliation for Rome. Anyway, Recula's death in 448 ended a reign that was marked by significant territorial expansion and military success. And, well, by the time of his death, the Suebi's presence was well and truly solidified in the Iberian Peninsula. He then passed the crown to his son, Reciar, leaving behind a kingdom far more extensive than the one he had inherited. Now, on to Reciar. He succeeded his father as king in 448, and he was notable for being a little bit of a trailblazer. In fact, he was the first Catholic Christian king among the Germanic peoples, and also for minting coins bearing his name, a sign of Suebic autonomy. His reign was marked by more ambitious expansions and diplomacy, including his marriage to the Gothic king Theodoric I's daughter, which of course enhanced relations between the Suebi and the Visigoths. Rechiar led successful plundering campaigns across various regions that were still under Roman control. Cities and towns such as Vasconia, Saragossa, and Leda, sometimes as well in coalition with local insurgents known as the Baguade. Well, despite the initial Roman interventions to stop the Suebi advances, the trend of the 5th century in Rome continued, and so did Rechiar's relentless campaigns, until 455 at least, targeting specifically territories previously ceded back to Rome. Well, in response to this, Emperor Avitus, along with their Visigothic allies, attempted to do somewhat of a diplomatic resolution. They reminded Rechiar with the established peace with Rome, granted also by Gothic favor. Undeterred, Rechiar embarked on 2 more campaigns in Tarraconensis, resulting in even more gains for the Suebi, certainly on a winning streak. Well, the Romans were certainly a shadow of them former selves. Well, the Romans under Emperor Avitus responded to Rechiar's defiance by allying with the Visigothic king Theodoric II, who invaded Galicia with a formidable force, including Burgundian allies. This all happened around the autumn of 456. Well, the Visigoths, being quite experienced fighters, decisively defeated the Suebi by the river Orbigo, either capturing or killing many. However, King Rechiar himself managed to flee from this, at least for a little while, only to be captured and executed later that year. Bad luck for King Rechiar. Theodoric's subsequent campaign further weakened the Suevi, despite his return to Gaul in 459 due to emerging threats there. That's a story for another time. Of course, whenever a king dies, everybody's up for the top job, and Rechiar's death led to the normal vacuum in Suebi leadership, and it led to Aiolf, possibly a Goth or a Vani, briefly seizing control. But then he was also killed in 457, so he didn't last very long. Well, the Suevi then had an election, and they elected Maldras as a king. Of course, only the upper echelons were electing the kings. Don't think of it like everybody passing in ballots at their local tavern. Well, of course, this election of Maldras caused a schism that eventually sought peace with the local populations. Despite the Goths depriving the Suevi of Baetica in 458, the internal strife and leadership challenges continued all the way until Remismund's ascension in 464, uniting the Suevi and restoring peace. The reign of Remismund saw renewed Suebi raids, and also plenty of successful military campaigns. Among them included the capture of Coimbra and of Lisbon. His reign also marked the Suebi's transition from paganism to Arian Christianity through missionary work initiated by the Visigothic king Theodoric II, establishing a lasting Arian church presence until the Suebi's conversion to Catholicism in the 560s. The historical period spanning from 470 to 550 in the Suebic kingdom is pretty mysterious, and there's very little contemporary sources available. But we do have something from Isidore of Seville, who was writing in the 7th century, that provides one of the very few insights into this area, noting that it was characterized by the reign of numerous Arian kings. The period of obscurity is further emphasized by references to kings like Theodemund in the Divisio Wambe, a medieval document, alongside other names like Hermaneric II, Recula II, and Rechiar II, found in later and somewhat less reliable chronicles. A significant piece of evidence from this era is a stone inscription discovered in Viraio, Portugal, dating to around 535. It commemorates the establishment of a church by a Benedictine nun under the rule of a king named Verimund. The inscription, while a valuable historical record, is still a subject of debate regarding its attribution. Some scholars suggest it could refer to Bermudo II of Leon, a much later figure. Further insights into the religious aspect of the time comes from a letter by Pope Vigilius to Profuturus, the Bishop of Braga, around 540. This correspondence reveals that there were conversions from Catholic Orthodoxy to Arianism, accompanied by the demolition of some Catholic Orthodox churches, under circumstances that are unspecified. These fragments of evidence give us a period of religious flux and political fragmentation within the Suebic kingdom, and it's a pretty broad reflection of the trends and transitions that were going on in the time of the post-Roman world. Well, the conversion of the Suebi to Catholic Orthodoxy from Arianism is a complex narrative in itself, and there's plenty of sources we have to draw our information. The problem is, each offers a different perspective on the pivotal moment. Well, the First Council of Braga on the 1st of May 561, convened under King Ariamir, marks a significant event in this transition of religion. Ariamir's role as an orthodox monarch is affirmed by his convening of the council, though debates persist regarding whether he was the first orthodox king since Rechiar. Isidore of Seville credits King Theodemar with the Suebi's conversion, highlighting the influential role of the missionary Martin of Braga. Contrarily, Gregory of Tours introduces Chararic, a king whose conversion story involves the miraculous healing of his son through relics and the intercession of St. Martin of Tours, a tale often seen as symbolizing Martin of Braga's missionary efforts, and also his devotion to St. Martin of Tours. Scholars have endeavored to reconcile these narratives, proposing various chronological and relational interpretations among Ariamir, Theodemar, and Cararic. Some suggest that Cararic's conversion preceded that of Theodemar, facilitated by the relics of St. Martin, with Theodemar's later embracing of Christianity attributed to Martin of Braga's preaching. There are others who speculate on the identities and relationships of these monarchs, with theories suggesting that Chararic and Theodemar might actually be the same person, or in fact that Theodemar and Ariamir were the same person, with Chararic being their father. I know, hard to keep up with, isn't it? Gregory of Tours' account has faced its own amount of skepticism, while some historians doubting Chararic's historical existence at all. Well, given the timeline of Martin of Braga's death around 580, and his approximate 30 years of bishopric, Chacaric's conversion, if historical, would likely have occurred around the year 550. Notably, the chronicler John of Biclarum attributes the Suebic conversion to the influence of the Visigoths, particularly under Recared I, suggesting a latter phase of religious transformation aligned with the Suebic integration into the Visigothic kingdom. This interpretation places the Suebic conversion within a broader context of the Iberian Peninsula's overall Christianization. In the late 5th or early 6th centuries, a group of Romano-Britons who were fleeing the Anglo-Saxon invasions established a settlement in the northern reaches of the Suebi kingdom of Galicia, in a region that would later become known as Britannia. The settlement's existence and characteristics are primarily known through the ecclesiastical records, notably from the Second Council of Braga in 572, which mentions a distinct diocese known as the Britonensis Ecclesia, or British Church, and references to a Sedes Britonarum, See of the Britons. That's S-E-E, not S-E-A. Now, this ecclesiastical recognition shows the establishment of a community with its own churches, and possibly the monastery Maximi, identified with the monastery of Saint Maria de Bredonia. The presence of a bishop named Maylock, bearing a Brythonic name, at this council highlights the integration of the British community into the ecclesiastical structure of Galicia, with continued representation and subsequent councils throughout the 7th century. The ecclesiastical affairs of the Suebi kingdom, particularly under Ariamir and Theodemar, show the broader context in which the Britons settled. Ariamir, who convened the First Council of Braga on the 1st of May 561 during his 3rd year as king, focused the council's efforts on condemning Priscillianism, with minimal attention to Arianism. This council is noted for its emphasis on Orthodox Christian practices, and for specifically rebuking certain Germanic customs among the clergy, signifying efforts to align the kingdom's religious practices with broader Christian orthodoxy. Theodemar, Ariamir's successor, further advanced these efforts by holding a council in Lugo on the 1st of January 569, aimed at the administrative and ecclesiastical organization of the kingdom. This council resulted in the division of Galicia into 2 provinces, each under the metropolitan authority of Braga and Lugo, and it also outlined the establishment of 13 episcopal sees, which included Britannia, demonstrating a rather structured approach to ecclesiastical governance. Miro's reign as the king of the Suevis started in 570, and it came at a time when the Visigothic kingdom under King Leovigild was on a mission to consolidate and expand its territories. The period saw significant religious and political development within the Suebi kingdom, particularly with the celebration of the Second Council of Braga in 572. This council, presided over by the influential St. Martin of Braga, marked a crucial step in the Suebi's transition to Catholicism. Martin, celebrated by contemporaries like Isidore of Seville, played the main role in promoting the cultural and political resurgence of the Suebic kingdom, and it shows the Catholic faith's unity and purity in Galatia, and discredits Arianism for the first time in the region. The Council of Braga's significance is further underscored by the participation of the 12 bishops, including 5 Suebis and 1 Briton, which gives us this new, diverse ecclesiastical team. Nero's reign was not solely focused on religious affairs, however. He couldn't forget about the military campaigns, notably against the Runcones, even as Leovigild made significant gains in the south, recapturing Cordova, Medina Sidonia, and leading successful assaults in the region around Malaga. The Visigothic encroachments on Suebi lands became a lot more pronounced from the year 573, with Leovigild's campaigns moving closer and entering Galatia itself eventually in the year 576. Miro's diplomatic efforts secured a temporary peace with Leovigild, but temporary is the important word here. Of course, the Suebi had to have some sort of sense of safety, so they began to stretch hands out to the Frankish king Gontram, although these attempts were intercepted by Chilperic I, and they didn't amount to much. Leovigild's son, Hermenegild's rebellion in 579, introduced a significant religious dimension to the Visigothic kingdom's internal strife, with his conversion to Catholicism marking a public rejection of Arianism. Remember, of course, that Arianism had fallen out of favor at this time and Catholicism was the established orthodoxy. So the Romans, of course, would have been quite happy to hear that a Catholic was trying to take control. Miro's involvement in 582, attempting to relieve the besieged Helmegild, underscores the Suebic kingdom's active participation in political and religious conflicts, not just in their own backyard, but in other people's territories. Now, Hermenegild's rebellion eventually failed in 584, following Leovigild's bribes to the Byzantines, which, of course, money always talks. It's an example of the fragile alliances and the significant role of external powers in the Iberian Peninsula, not only during this period, but pretty much always. Unfortunately, the Byzantines, if you were going to be Catholic or Arian, well, they had their preferences, but everything comes down to money. Depending on the ruler, of course, but this is the situation for the majority of Byzantine history. Now, upon Miro's death, his son, Eberic, ascended the Suebi throne, extending gestures of goodwill to the Visigothic king Leovigild, possibly in hopes of either securing peace or perhaps an alliance. However, this fledgling reign was cut short as Ordica, Eberic's brother-in-law, staged a coup and he had military support backing him. This forced Eberic to retreat into monastic life in the priesthood, thereby disqualifying him from the kingship. Ortica then solidified his power by marrying Miro's widow, Sisaguntia, and of course declaring himself king. Of course, this internal upheaval within the Suebi kingdom presented Leovigild with a prime opportunity to slither in and assert Visigothic dominance over the region. And that's exactly what he did. In 585, Leovigild launched a military campaign against the Suebi, effectively annexing Galicia and extinguishing the Suevic kingdom. John of Biclaro's account vividly describes the Visigoths' devastating campaign, which not only conquered the Suevic territory, but also appropriated its wealth, integrating the Suebic nation into the Visigothic kingdom as simply another one of its provinces. Concurrently, the Franks under King Guntram attempted to intervene, possibly in support of the Suebi, but their efforts were thwarted again by Leovigild's forces. Captured by the Visigoths, Ortica was subjected to the same fate he had imposed on Eberic, tonsured and exiled to Bajor in southern Lusitania. The brief resurgence under a rebel named Malaric was quickly quelled by Leovigild, further cementing Visigothic control and scaring anybody who was willing to perhaps make a stand against it. Leovigild's conquest brought the Arian Church back among the Suebi, albeit temporarily. His successor, Recared, championed Catholicism, leading to the mass conversion of both the Visigoths and the Suebi. The Third Council of Toledo marked this significant religious transition, with several bishops, including 4 from the Suebi, outright renouncing Arianism. Recared's achievements in unifying religious practices under Catholicism earned him recognition from Pope Gregory the Great, further legitimizing his rule over the newly conquered kingdom. Well, despite the Visigothic takeover, the Suebi's administrative structures initially persisted, with many of their ecclesiastical sees and mints continuing under Visigothic rule. However, by the mid-7th century, Visigothic administrative and ecclesiastical reforms led to the disillusionment of most Suebi-specific institutions, integrating their territories more fully into the broader Visigothic kingdom. Notably, there was no significant Gothic migration into former Suebi lands during this period, indicating a degree of continuity for the local population. By the 10th century, the Suebi were mentioned alongside other peoples of the Iberian Peninsula, suggesting their absorption into the broader Galician or Hispano-Gothic population. And just like that, they faded into history, like everybody else does. Thank you very much for listening. It was good to have you with me once more. I'd like to thank my top-tier patrons, that is, JC, Stark Factory, and Jeffrey. Thank you very much, lads. If you'd like to become a member of the Patreon, I don't have to explain to you in detail how to do it. Just follow the links to the page. Otherwise, once more, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now, and good night.